Welcome to the Movement series, where we explore one book, one chapter at a time to ignite fresh vision for disciple making movements around the world. I'm Isa, and this season we're walking through Spent Matches by Roy Moran, a bold call to rethink church and re engage the mission of Jesus in a radically practical way. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting your journey, this series will challenge and inspire you to step into the movement God is already stirring. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, which is part of the Movement series. I'm your host speaker. And today, we're embarking on a really fascinating journey. It's a look into a pretty bold vision for spiritual transformation. We're taking a close look specifically at Chapter 9, titled Jump, from Roy Moran's book, Spent Matches. It's quite thought-provoking. Our mission, really, for this deep dive is to unpack what it truly means to be movement-ready and how we can maybe overcome some deeply ingrained thinking to foster genuine spiritual multiplication. This isn't just theory, It feels raw, real, and honestly, a refreshingly unorthodox perspective on the church's mission today. So let's dive right in. Moran titles this chapter Jump. That word itself, jump, it sets a really urgent tone, doesn't it?
It really does.
What's the core challenge he's addressing right from the start that makes this jump so critical? And what was his own internal struggle with this idea initially?
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that Moran, the author, he starts by confronting his own biases, right up front. He was questioning whether these disciple-making movements, or DMMs as he calls them, whether they could actually work in the West. Because, historically they often thrived in rural areas, sometimes poverty-stricken contexts, quite different from our materialistic, often family structure-challenged Western world.
Okay, so a context question right away.
Exactly. And he also struggled with the language, the terminology. These movements, they sounded more like small groups to him, not what he traditionally thought of as a church. And this wrestling, it led him to a really crucial realization, I think. In Western culture, it's often better, maybe more effective, to use the term DMM instead of CPM, which stands for Church Planting Movement.
Why the difference?
Well, to avoid getting bogged down in, frankly, unproductive debates about what exactly defines a church. It helps keep the focus squarely on the main thing, the Great Commission, making disciples. Don't let the form a church structure overshadow the function, the multiplication.
That really highlights a key tension right there, form versus function. And the author uses some incredibly vivid analogies, memorable ones, to drive home this point, that radical shifts are often needed, really needed for survival. Can you tell us about the Mann Gulch fire and this idea he brings up of a burning platform?
Mm-hmm. This really forces us to ask, when is it actually time to abandon what's familiar, what feels safe? The Mann Gulch fire back in 1949, it's just a stark illustration. You had this firefighter, Wagner Dodge. He's trapped, his crew is trapped by this blaze moving incredibly fast. And he makes this totally counterintuitive decision. Almost sounds crazy.
What did he do?
He ordered his men to drop their heavy gear, their tools, their safety equipment, everything. And then, this is the shocking part, he started a small fire right around them, created a burnt patch of ground to stand in, an escape fire.
Wow, that sounds completely illogical.
It did to his crew. It seems self-annihilating, perhaps. And tragically, many of them didn't follow him. They couldn't make that jump. But it was the only way to survive the main inferno. Moran connects this to something called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Ah, right. Where we tend to overestimate our own abilities, especially when we don't know much.
Exactly. We think we're doing okay, we've got it handled, when actually our current methods, our familiar approach, might be leading us straight into danger, into that burning situation. So for you listening, the question is, when do you recognize that your comfortable approach might actually be the burning platform? And can you summon the courage to make that counterintuitive leap? To jump, even if it means leaving behind things you thought were essential.
That burning platform image is powerful, really speaks to urgency. So it sounds like this jump isn't just about desperate survival. It's also about fundamentally redefining success, right?
Precisely.
The book argues that for real spiritual movements to happen, we need this fundamental shift in how we define success, how we prioritize our efforts. And he uses two brands we all know, Kodak and Lego, to illustrate this. What's the lesson he pulls from their, very different stories?
Yeah, connecting this to the bigger picture, Kodak and Lego they're incredibly clear examples of focusing on form versus function. Kodak, ironically, invented the first digital camera. But they failed. Why?
Because they were stuck on film.
Exactly. They were fixated on their core business, the form of film and chemical processing. They couldn't let go of that traditional product. Even as the world was obviously shifting to digital image capture, they essentially went bankrupt, trying to protect the past, the existing structure, instead of adapting to the evolving purpose, the function.
Okay, so they missed the function of image capture.
Right. Now, contrast that with Lego. Lego succeeded brilliantly because they held on to the core, enduring function, which is creativity through building blocks, but they were incredibly flexible with the forms. They introduced Duplos for younger kids, brought in new colors like pink and purple to broaden appeal, adapted with all sorts of themed sets.
They kept changing the what, but kept the why.
That's a great way to put it. They understood the purpose-enabling creative building was key. The tools, the forms could evolve. So the lesson is pretty stark. For movements to emerge, we have to prioritize the function, like making disciples, and let the forms, church structures, programs, meeting times follow that function, not the other way around.
That makes so much sense. Prioritize the why over the what, as you said.
Okay.
Another really powerful image in this chapter, kind of like the Mann Gulch story and its impact, is the story of Eustace Scrubb from C.S. Lewis's Narnia books. It sounds like it serves as a profound parable for the internal transformation needed before you can even think about an external jump.
Oh, absolutely. It's a deep one. Eustace, who starts out as this really unpleasant, selfish boy, he literally turns into a dragon because of his greedy, dragonish thoughts, and he tries desperately on his own to scrape off his dragon scales. But every layer he peels back just reveals more dragon skin underneath.
He can't change himself.
He's totally powerless. His own efforts are futile. It's only when Aslan, the great lion figure, comes and peels away those layers, painfully, the story emphasizes, but lovingly, that Eustace is transformed back into a boy. Moran uses this to illustrate that for new spiritual movements to really take root, we need a similar radical internal transformation. We need to strip away centuries of what he calls historically embedded cultural exegesis.
Okay, what does that mean in simpler terms?
It basically means all the deep layers of cultural assumptions, traditions, habits, and pre-existing theological frameworks that have built up over generations. Things that filter and maybe even distort how we understand and apply the Bible today. He argues this requires developing what he terms a bimodal type of thinking.
Bimodal, like two modes.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about ditching truth. It's about holding firmly to the fundamental, unchanging truths of faith, while remaining incredibly flexible and adaptable with the cultural forms and expressions of that faith. So for you, the listener, this really brings up a challenging question. What old skin, what ingrained assumptions, traditional methods, comfortable habits might you need to shed? Even if it feels painful, like Eustace's transformation, what needs to go so you can truly embrace a new way of seeing and doing, to allow for genuine transformation and multiplication?
That's a powerful challenge, and it really sets us up for what comes next in the chapter. Because the author then lays out 10 specific crucial mind shifts he believes are necessary for these kinds of movements to emerge today in the 21st century. These really do sound like a blueprint for a kind of spiritual revolution. Instead of just listing them all, let's really dig into a few of the most impactful ones. What do they mean for us practically?
Yeah, this is where the rubber really meets the road, where the paradigm shift becomes concrete. Let's start with a really foundational one. Moving from trusting the qualified to releasing the willing. Our default often is to rely on highly trained leaders, people with theological degrees, ordained clergy, the experts, right, to lead ministry. But this can create a sort of exclusive system. Moran uses the analogy of cherry blossom trees.
Cherry blossom trees. How so?
Well, they're beautiful, they're well-maintained, they produce lovely blossoms, but they aren't primarily designed for bearing lots of fruit or for rapid multiplication. They're more about institutional beauty and upkeep.
So it's not that qualifications are inherently bad.
Not at all.
But focusing only on the highly qualified can create a bottleneck. It limits who gets to play.
Precisely. It limits capacity. And he uses the historical example of Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis. Back in the 19th century, doctors, the qualified experts of their day, were unknowingly spreading deadly childbed fever because they weren't doing something as simple as washing their hands between examining patients and delivering babies.
Wow, so their expert methods were actually harmful.
In that case, yes. The point is, traditional methods, even by experts, aren't always effective and can sometimes even hinder. Movements thrive when simple, repeatable tools empower everyone, the willing to participate and lead, regardless of their formal training or fancy credentials. It's about building capacity across the board. Building on that idea, Moran then challenges our very model of growth itself. He urges a shift from human reproduction to viral replication.
Okay, that sounds
Right.
different. Viral replication.
Yeah. Our typical mental model for spiritual growth often mirrors human reproduction, doesn't it? It's seen as a slow process, requiring a long period of maturity and development before someone is ready to reproduce spiritually. But Moran argues the gospel message itself and the process of making disciples should spread through simple, repeatable processes that allow for rapid, almost unhindered viral replication. Think of how an idea or a video goes viral online. It's not slowed down by complex structures or institutional gatekeepers.
So moving from slow, deliberate, maybe controlled growth to something potentially far more explosive and decentralized.
Exactly. Imagine an idea spreading like a contagious positive force, not requiring years of formal training before each new person can pass it on.
That's a radical thought for many church contexts, I imagine. If we can release everyone, the willing, and enable this kind of viral replication, what then becomes the actual priority, like the measure of success?
That leads directly into another really critical shift he talks about. From form to function. We touched on this with Kodak and Lego. Jesus said, "I will build my church," right? But his direct command to his followers, to us, was go, make disciples.
Moran argues our primary role, our function, is to call people into obedience to Jesus, to disciple them. When we faithfully do that, when we make disciples, then the church, in the sense of biblically functioning communities, will naturally emerge. It's the fruit.
So the danger is starting with the structure. The danger is when we prioritize planting churches as a form or an institution first. When we do that, we don't always end up with genuine, obedient disciples, or at least not with the kind of transformational impact and multiplication we see in the New Testament. The form can get in the way of the function. And this connects tightly to the next shift, from conversion to making disciples.
How are those different in his view?
Well, traditional persuasive evangelism can sometimes unintentionally lead people to trust a prayer or make a decision without that leading to true, deep, life-altering transformation and ongoing obedience. The call, Moran argues, is to disciple people towards conversion. It's a deeper, more holistic process where transformation is evident and obedience is the pathway, not just an optional extra. It's not just about a one-time event, but embedding people in a journey of following Jesus.
Okay, so discipleship leads to conversion and continues through it.
Yes, and that naturally leads to another related shift, from knowledge-focused to obedience-focused. Western Christianity, let's be honest, often emphasizes accumulating biblical knowledge, information transfer. It's almost as if we think Jesus commanded us to teach all things. But his actual command in the Great Commission was, teach them to obey all things. There's a crucial difference there.
Action versus information.
Right. True spiritual transformation, Moran contends, comes through designing experiences that lead people directly to obedience, to actively applying the truth in their lives, not just nodding along or storing up facts. So for you listening, the question becomes, is your spiritual life, or the way you lead others, focused primarily on accumulating information? Or is it geared towards actively living out what you learn, towards obedience?
It's shifting the goalpost from knowing to doing. That's a significant reorientation. What about the leaders in all this? How should they approach this? It sounds like the author has some pretty provocative ideas about leadership style and driving this kind of cultural change.
Oh, absolutely. And perhaps one of the most provocative shifts, especially for established leaders, is the call to move from thinking like a marketer to thinking like a revolutionary.
Marketer versus revolutionary. What's the core difference there?
Marketing-driven approaches, often focused on programs and events, might create temporary excitement or draw a crowd, but they rarely build the deep, sustainable, transforming culture needed for a movement. Building a true disciple-making culture, Moran says, is more like a reconstruction project. It requires radical commitment, a willingness to challenge the status quo. It often starts small, maybe on the fringes, and it requires embracing failure as part of the learning process, learning to fail faster and smarter, as they say.
So revolutionaries are trying to change the underlying system, not just sell a product or program.
Exactly. They focus on transforming the culture, the paradigms, the way people think and operate. It's about fundamental change, deep change, not just tweaking the edges or running a better campaign.
That distinction between marketing and revolution, that's huge. It feels like it demands a completely different posture from leaders.
It really does, which naturally leads to another shift he highlights, From leading toward to leading from.
Leading from, what does that look like?
It means leaders influencing more from the background, maybe. Their goal is to connect people directly to the Bible, directly to God, rather than creating dependence on their own personality, charisma, or the central institution. Their influence is perhaps quieter but powerful in empowering others. It allows the movement to grow organically beyond their personal presence. It's about multiplying leaders, not just gathering followers. And a final related idea here is moving from being a content provider to being a learning designer.
Okay, explain that one. Content provider to learning designer.
Instead of leaders primarily seeing their role as telling people what to think, delivering sermons, teaching lessons, providing the answers, the kind of reformation Moran envisions needs leaders who design learning experiences. Experiences that help people grapple with Scripture themselves, make their own meaning from eternal truth, and figure out how to obey it in their context.
So empowering discovery and application rather than just delivering information.
Precisely. So for you as a listener, maybe in a leadership role or just influencing others, it invites the question, are you primarily focused on giving content? Or are you designing ways for people to discover, internalize, and obey God's truth for themselves? Are you creating dependency or fostering independent, multiplying faith?
These shifts are, well, they're profound. They definitely challenge a lot of conventional church thinking. But this isn't just abstract theory for the author, right? It's practical. What does he actually suggest for someone who hears this and thinks, okay, I want to start fostering this new culture of movements? Where do they begin? And what's his overall vision for the future?
Yeah, he's very practical about the how. He really emphasizes starting small. Don't try to overhaul everything overnight. Begin with test groups, maybe just a few people. Allow yourself to fail in obscurity, as he puts it. Learn from those early experiences without the pressure of a big public launch or scrutiny.
Fail in obscurity. I like that. Takes the pressure off.
It does. And he stresses the absolute necessity of having coaches and mentors on this journey. He distinguishes them slightly. A coach helps with the skills, the practical how-tos of disciple making. A mentor helps you process the internal stuff, the turmoil, the doubts, the emotional challenges that inevitably come with making such radical shifts.
You need both the practical and the personal support.
Absolutely. He also cautions against getting fixated on measuring success purely by numbers, like attendance or budgets. Instead, he advocates using biblical principles and clear evidence of life transformation and obedience as the real scorecard. And maybe most importantly, he advises learning to make friends with failure, seeing setbacks not as enemies to be avoided at all costs, but as valuable mentors, continuously capturing the lessons learned from both what works and what doesn't. His overarching vision, then, is for what he calls a server church.
A server church?
Yeah, think of it like a central body or resource hub whose primary function is to serve, resource, and support a diverse network of biblically functioning communities. These could be simple house churches, groups meeting in workplaces, fellowships on college campuses, online communities, you name it, all sorts of expressions. It's a vision where the central institution isn't trying to draw everyone back to itself. Instead, it's jealous, as he puts it, not for its own people or dollars, but jealous for seeing the Great Commission fulfilled everywhere through all these decentralized, multiplying communities.
Wow, that's a radical reorientation of what a central church body might do. Resource rather than gather.
It's about radical generosity and decentralization focused purely on the mission.
So let's bring this home. What does all this mean for you, the listener? The author's vision, these shifts, these practical steps. It sounds incredibly exciting, maybe a bit daunting, but genuinely transformative. What's the final, maybe provocative thought that you should take away from this deep dive into Chapter 9, into Jump?
I think it really boils down to one core question, the one posed by the chapter title itself. Are you, personally, willing to jump? Moran's core argument is that our current platform, our historical methods, our comfortable forms, our institutional structures, is in many places proving ineffective. It might even be on fire, as the Mann Gulch analogy suggests. Why? Because it's often fixated on preserving old forms rather than embracing the vital, urgent function of making disciples who make disciples. So the ultimate challenge for you, listening right now, is, can you embrace this call to a new kind of reformation? Can you cultivate the mental flexibility needed? Can you let go of what feels safe but might no longer be serving the core mission? And can you commit, perhaps starting small, to simple, repeatable, obedience-focused disciple-making? Just imagine for a moment the potential power unleashed if every ordinary follower of Jesus felt equipped and empowered to actually fulfill his command, unburdened by centuries of accumulated tradition or institutional weight. What could that look like in your life, in your neighborhood, in your community? That's the jump.
That's a powerful place to leave it. What could that look like? That was a truly insightful deep dive into Chapter 9 of Roy Moran's Spent Matches, offering a challenging yet hopeful vision for how spiritual movements can emerge when we dare to jump from old paradigms. If this conversation sparked some new questions for you, or maybe challenged your thinking, well, that's exactly what we hope for here. You can always revisit this discussion and other deep dives on the Movement series wherever you get your audio. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into sources shaping the conversation on movements. Until then, keep digging, keep learning, and definitely keep asking those big, important questions.
Thanks for joining us on the Movement series. If today's conversation stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter as we continue walking through Spent Matches by Roy Moran. Until next time, keep leaning into the mission, because movements start when ordinary people say yes to an extraordinary God. To get connected and learn more, visit newgenerations.network.